The word gospel means good news, and Mark's gospel tells us where the good news of Jesus began. To state the obvious, it began with Jesus, what he did and what he said. But when he did and said those things, the people who were so impressed when they saw him and heard him felt that they needed to talk about it. They began to talk about it, and the gospel of Mark is one of the products of that conversation. Jesus is such good news because he's the Son of God, says Mark, and he spoke about the future renovation of the world that God was going to bring about, and the key event in God's program to bring that about is when Jesus died on the cross in Jerusalem. He dies so that people might gain an entrance into that kingdom of God. Well, we know a little bit about Mark. We don't know a lot, but we know he's mentioned in the New Testament a number of times. We know that he had two names. John was his Hebrew name, his Jewish name, and Mark was his Roman name. He wasn't a follower of Jesus in the early days, but he became a follower of Jesus around about the beginning of the earliest Christian movement. If Jerusalem was the main city or the most important city for the Jews, the most important city for the Roman Empire was Rome. And we know that Mark was written for Rome. We know from writings outside the New Testament that Mark, having previously accompanied Paul, also accompanied Peter, and Peter was preaching in Rome, and everybody loved what he had to say about Jesus, and they wanted it, after he left, they wanted it to be written down, and Mark was the person who got that job. Mark's story gets straight into the action of what Jesus did, and the action of Jesus really begins with a man called John, who was a baptizer, and he appeared in the desert of Judea, down south, baptizing and calling upon Israel to get right with God. Now Jesus, when we first read of him in Mark's Gospel, comes from Nazareth, and although we're not exactly sure where the first century Nazareth was, it's probably roughly where the town of Nazareth is today, that is sitting on the northern side of the Jezreel Valley. Jesus would have come down that valley and then down the Jordan Valley to meet with John the Baptist. We know that John was born to Zachariah and Elizabeth, and he grew up in the hill country of Judea down south. We also know that John was a cousin of Jesus, just born a little bit ahead of him, but he was one of Jesus' cousins. In recent days, we've discovered a traditional site where John the Baptist's ministry is remembered. The Jordan River's changed its direction a little bit, and so it's not where the river's flowing today. The other interesting thing about the traditional site is that it's the same area of Elijah being transported into heaven, as the story goes in the Old Testament. And so it's interesting those two sites are together because to put the two stories together, Elijah was transported to heaven, and here we have John the Baptist appearing as the one who fulfills the prophecy that in the last days Elijah would come again and get Israel ready for the arrival of the Lord himself. Jesus comes down the Jordan River to be baptized by John with a whole bunch of other Israelites, getting ready for the great and terrible day of the Lord. But the significant thing for Mark when he tells the story about Jesus' baptism is this was the moment when the direction of Jesus' life was going to be set. Jesus went down into the water to be baptized by John, and when he came up out of the water, he saw the heavens parting, the Spirit of God descending upon him, and a voice from heaven came out which identified him by quoting a couple of passages from the Old Testament. One of them was from Psalm chapter 2, which is about the Messiah, the great conquering king that was promised to come. Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God. And the other quotation from this voice from heaven was from Isaiah chapter 42, which spoke about the servant of the Lord being equipped by the Spirit of God. And the strange thing is, the servant of the Lord was someone who achieved his purpose by suffering terribly and by dying. So how do you put those two things together, the great conquering king of Psalm 2 and the suffering servant of Isaiah 42? It's hard to know how they're put together at the beginning of the story, But this is what Mark's going to show us. From this point on, Jesus' ministry was set. He knew his destiny. His script was written, and now all he needed to do was to fulfill it.